From objective to subjective guilt. What kind of subjective position does such a universe imply? Let us take as our starting point Brecht's learning play, Die Maßnahme, The Measures Taken, in which a young revolutionary, part of a group of communist agitators sent to China to stimulate revolutionary activity, is killed by fellow communists because they consider him a security risk, and he dutifully assents to his execution. Although this play is often presented as a justification of the Stalinist show trials, there is a crucial distinction between the two. What separated Brecht's fictional agitators from Stalin's very real prosecutors like Dzerzhinsky and policemen like Beria was the latter's banal insistence that the defendants had really done this or that wicked, blood-soaked, conspiratorial deed, rather than pursuing the idea of a paradoxical objective guilt, transcending the actual facts. Brecht stacks the cards in such a way that we, the audience, are bound to embrace the executed hero. Brecht's critical interpreter Herbert Luthi admitted that no communist country or organization has ever staged the play. The party itself does not like so much candor, but failed to notice that Brecht's candor in exposing the ruthlessness of the party line is incompatible with subscribing to it. The true believers invariably kept their knowledge to themselves. The problem with this reading is that it falsifies Brecht's position in two key ways. 1. Brecht does not justify the killing of the young comrade in terms of objective guilt, but in terms of pragmatic expediency. The young comrade had removed his mask and revealed his face, thus compromising them all. His killing was not a punishment. 2. For Brecht, the open exposition of the mechanism is not incompatible with subscribing to it. The great dramatic tension of the piece is that, while fully displaying the harshness of the measure taken, the way the unfortunate young comrade's life is ruthlessly sacrificed, he still condones it. The true question is, why can the logic of objective guilt not be explicitly asserted? Why does it have to remain a kind of obscene secret, admitted only in a semi-private place? Why would its full public assertion be self-destructive? We encounter here the mystery of appearance at its purest. Objective guilt, the fact that the more you are subjectively innocent with regard to factual accusations, the more you are objectively guilty, must not appear as such. The question is thus, what kind of ethics enables us to talk about objective guilt? Obviously, an immoral ethics. The philosopher of immoral ethics was Friedrich Nietzsche, and we should remember that the title of his masterpiece is The Genealogy of Morals. Morals, not ethics. The two are not the same. Morality is concerned with the symmetry of my relations with other human beings. Its zero-level rule is, do not do to me what you do not want me to do to you. Ethics, on the contrary, deals with my consistency with myself, my fidelity to my own desires. On the back flyleaf of a 1939 edition of Lenin's Materialism and Imperiocriticism, Stalin made the following note in red pencil. 1. Weakness. 2. Idleness. 3. Stupidity. These are the only things that can be called vices. Everything else, in the absence of the aforementioned, is undoubtedly virtue. NB. If a man is 1. Strong, spiritually, 2. Active, 3. Clever, or capable, then he is good, regardless of any other vices. 1 plus 3 make 2. This is as concise as ever a formulation of immoral ethics. In contrast to it, a weakling who obeys moral rules and worries about his guilt stands for unethical morality, the target of Nietzsche's critique of ressentiment. There is, however, a limit to Stalinism, not that it is too immoral, but that it is secretly too moral, still relying on a figure of the big other. As we have seen in what is arguably the most intelligent legitimization of Stalinist terror, Merleau-Ponty's Humanism and Terror from 1946. The terror is justified as a kind of wager on the future, almost in the mode of the theology of Pascal, who enjoins us to make a bet on God. If the final result of today's horror will be the bright communist future, then this outcome will retroactively redeem the terrible things a revolutionary has to do today. Along similar lines, even some Stalinists themselves, when, half privately usually, they were forced to admit that many of the victims of the purges were innocent, accused and killed because the party needed their blood to fortify its unity, would look to the future moment of final victory in which all the necessary victims would at last be given their due and their innocence, and highest sacrifice for the cause would be recognized. This is what Lacan, in his ethics seminar, refers to as the perspective of the last judgment, a perspective even more clearly discernible in one of the key terms of the Stalinist discourse, that of the objective guilt and objective meaning of your acts. While you can be an honest individual who acted with the most sincere intentions, you are nonetheless objectively guilty if your acts serve reactionary forces, and it is, of course, the party which has the direct access to what your acts objectively mean. Here again, we do not only have the perspective of the last judgment, which formulates the objective meaning of your acts, but also the present agent who already has the unique ability to judge today's events and act from this perspective. We can see now why Lacan's motto, Il n'y a pas de grand autre, there is no big other, brings us to the very core of the ethical problematic. What it excludes is precisely this perspective of the last judgment, the idea that somewhere, even if only as a thoroughly virtual point of reference, even if we concede that we cannot ever occupy its place and pass the actual judgment, there must be a standard which allows us to take a measure of our acts and pronounce their true meaning, their true ethical status. Even Jacques Derrida's notion of deconstruction as justice seems to rely on a utopian hope which sustains the spectre of infinite justice, forever postponed, always to come, but nonetheless here as the ultimate horizon of our activity. The harshness of Lacanian ethics is that it demands that we thoroughly relinquish this reference, and its further wager is that not only does this abdication not leave us in the grip of an ethical insecurity or relativism, or even undermine the very foundations of ethical activity, but that renouncing the guarantee of some big other is the very condition of a truly autonomous ethics. Recall that the dream about Irma's injection that Freud used as an exemplary case to illustrate his procedure of analyzing dreams is a dream about responsibility, Freud's own responsibility for the failure of his treatment of Irma. This fact alone indicates that responsibility is a crucial Freudian notion. But how are we to conceive it? How are we to avoid the common misperception that the basic ethical message of psychoanalysis is precisely the one of relieving myself of my responsibility, of putting the blame on the other? Since the unconscious is the discourse of the other, I am not responsible for my unconscious formations. It is the big other who speaks through me. I am merely its instrument. Lacan himself pointed the way out of this deadlock by referring to Kant's philosophy as the crucial antecedent of psychoanalytic ethics. According to the Standard Critique, the limitation of the Kantian universalist ethic of the categorical imperative, the unconditional injunction to do our duty, resides in its formal indeterminacy. The moral law does not tell me what my duty is, it merely tells me that I should accomplish my duty, and so leaves the space open for empty voluntarism. Whatever I decide to be my duty is my duty. However, far from being a limitation, this very feature brings us to the core of Kantian ethical autonomy. It is not possible to derive the concrete norms I have to follow in my specific situation from the moral law itself, which means that it is the subject himself who has to assume the responsibility for translating the abstract injunction of the moral law into a series of concrete obligations. The full acceptance of this paradox compels us to reject any reference to duty as an excuse. I know this is heavy and can be painful, What can I do? This is my duty. Kant's ethics of unconditional duty is often taken as justifying such an attitude. No wonder Adolf Eichmann himself referred to Kantian ethics when he tried to justify his role in planning and executing the Holocaust. He was just doing his duty and obeying the Führer's orders. However, the aim of Kant's emphasis on the subject's full moral autonomy and responsibility is precisely to prevent any such maneuver of shifting the blame onto some figure of the big other. So let us return to Stalin. The commonplace condemnation of Stalin comprises two propositions. One, he was a cynic who knew very well how things stood, that the accused at the show trials were really innocent, and so on. And two, he knew what he was doing, that is, he had full control over the events. Documents from the newly accessible archives rather point in the opposite direction. Stalin basically did believe in the official ideology, in his role as an honest leader, in the guilt of the accused, and so on. And he did not really control the events. The actual result of his own measures and interventions often shocked him. Lars T. Lee proposed a distressing conclusion. The people of the Soviet Union would probably have been better off if Stalin had been more cynical than he was. There is, however, a different way to read Stalin's belief. It is not that he personally believed. He wanted the big other to believe. Lee himself points in this direction when he condones Robert Tucker's amazement at how much pain and suffering went into the mass production of confessions during 1937. These confessions served no earthly purpose. They were promptly filed away and forgotten. Tucker speculates that Stalin insisted on these confessions as proof to posterity that his vision of a world filled with enemies was basically correct. What if, however, we take the statement that the extorted confessions served no earthly purpose more literally? They were filed away and forgotten by actual people because their addressee was not these actual people, but the virtual big other. The same big other that can only account for the well-known incident concerning the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, which occurred in 1954, immediately after the fall of Beria. When Soviet subscribers received the volume of the encyclopedia, which contained the entries under the letter B, there was, of course, a double-page article on Beria, praising him as the great hero of the Soviet Union. After his fall and denunciation as a traitor and spy, all subscribers received from the publishing house a letter asking them to cut out and return the page on Beria. In exchange, they were promptly sent a double-page entry with photos on the Bering Strait, so that when they inserted it into the volume, its wholeness was re-established. There was no blank to bear witness to the sudden rewriting of history. The mystery here is, for whom was this semblance of wholeness maintained? If every subscriber knew about the manipulation, since he had to perform it himself. The only answer is, of course, for the innocent gaze of the big other. This is why the structure of Stalinism is inherently theological. This is why Stalinism so desperately strived to maintain proper appearances. Such a solution to the enigma also allows us to reject the dilemma, was Stalin a believer or a cynic? As a false one. He was both at the same time. Personally, he, of course, was often aware of the lie in the official discourse, so personally, he was a cynic. But he was simultaneously quite sincere in his efforts to safeguard the innocence and sincerity of the big other. The modern name for this other, who is supposed to believe in our stead, is the people. When Golda Meir was asked whether she believed in God, she said, "I believe in the Jewish people, and the Jewish people believe in God." One should be very precise in interpreting this statement. It does not imply that the majority of Jews believe in God. As a matter of fact, the state of Israel is arguably the most atheistic country in the world, the only one in which a clear majority of its citizens do not believe in God. What it implies is a certain fetishization of the people, even if, to go to the extreme, no individual Jewish citizen of Israel believes. Each of them presupposes that the people believes, and this presupposition is enough to make her act as if she believes. A Stalinist acts not on behalf of real individuals, but on account of the people, this virtual big other which believes even if no empirical individual believes. In this way, he can combine his individual cynicism with his objective sincerity. He does not have to believe in a cause. He only believes in the people supposed to believe. This brings us to the underlying subjective position of the Stalinist communist, the position of a pervert. A true Stalinist politician loves mankind, but nonetheless performs horrible purges and executions. His heart is breaking while he is doing it, but he cannot help it. It is his duty towards the progress of humanity. This is the perverse attitude of adopting the position of the pure instrument of the big other's will. It is not my responsibility. It is not me who is effectively doing it. I am merely an instrument of the higher historical necessity. As to the genesis of this perverse subjective position, it would be revealing to engage in a detailed account of how the Bolshevik movement related to medicine, to the doctors who took care of the leaders. 3 documents are crucial here. First are Lenin's letters to Gorky from the fall of 1913, in which, deeply disturbed by Gorky's support for the humanist ideology of God-building, Lenin implies that Gorky has succumbed to this deviation because of his bad nerves, and advises him to go to Switzerland and get the best medical treatment there. In one of the letters, after making it clear how he is shocked at Gorky's ideas, "Dear Alexei Maximovich, what are you doing then? Really, it is terrible, simply terrible. Why are you doing this? It is terribly painful. Yours, V.I." Lenin adds a strange postscript. P.S. Take care of yourself more seriously, really, so that you will be able to travel in winter without catching cold. In winter, it is dangerous. Obviously, Lenin is worried that apart from catching cold, Gorky will catch a much more serious ideological disease, as is clear from the subsequent letter posted together with the previous one. Perhaps I don't understand you well. Perhaps you were joking when you wrote "for the moment." Concerning the construction of God, perhaps you didn't write that seriously. Good heavens, take care of yourself a little better. Yours, Lenin. What should surprise us here is the way the root of ideological deviation is located in a bodily condition, overexcited nerves, that needs medical treatment. Is it not a bit of supreme irony that in Trotsky's dream from 1935, in which the dead Lenin appears to him, he gives him exactly the same advice? He was questioning me anxiously about my illness. "You seem to have accumulated nervous fatigue. You must rest." I answered that I had always recovered from fatigue quickly, thanks to my native Schwungkraft, but that this time the trouble seemed to lie in some deeper processes. "Then you should seriously," he emphasized the word, "consult the doctors." Several names. So to bring this logic to its conclusion, one is tempted to imagine a scene between Lenin and Stalin in the last year of Lenin's life, after his stroke and collapse, when, with his last forces, he ferociously attacks Stalin, and Stalin answers him patronizingly. "Good heavens, Comrade Lenin, you seem to have accumulated nervous fatigue. You must rest. You should consult the doctors more seriously." Here Lenin would have received his own message in its inverted true form, an appropriate punishment for his mistake. Second, there is Stalin's speech at Lenin's funeral, on the death of Lenin, delivered on January 26, 1924, which begins with, "Comrades, we communists are people of a special mold. We are made of a special stuff. We are those who form the army of the great proletarian strategist, the army of Comrade Lenin. There is nothing higher than the honor of belonging to this army. There is nothing higher than the title of member of the party whose founder and leader was Comrade Lenin. It is not given to everyone to be a member of such a party. It is not given to everyone to withstand the stresses and storms that accompany membership in such a party." Lenin's obsession with the body of the revolutionary, which for him was merely an idiosyncrasy, is here, as it were, elevated into a concept. A Bolshevik cadre is perceived as the one who possesses a special body, not a body like others, which is why special care should be taken of it, and eventually the body deserves to be preserved in a mausoleum. Third is the fact that Stalin's last paranoid obsession concerned the so-called doctor's plot. All the doctors who were treating him and the top Soviet leadership were arrested and tortured to make them confess that they were part of an international US Jewish conspiracy to kill the Soviet leadership. Again, the continuity with the previous 2 points is clear. The doctor's crime was not merely killing their ordinary human patients, but killing the sacred bodies of revolutionary cadres. So what is a cadre? One is tempted to play the Heideggerian game for a brief moment, discerning in cadre the ancient Greek tetragonos, as this word appears at the beginning of a poem by Simonides from the 5th century BC. It is arduous to be a truly able man, in hands and feet, as well as in mind square, tetragonos, without fault. The intermediary link between this Greek notion and the communist one is none other than Kazimir Malevich's black square on white surface. The square figure against the nondescript background. So, to put it in Heideggerese, the essence of the cadre is to provide a cadre, square, frame, for the essence itself. Far from being a mere metaphor, this notion of the cadre's special body is grounded in the logic of objective meaning, shared by Lenin and Stalin. While ordinary individuals are caught in historical events which surpass them, blinded to their true meaning, so that their consciousness is false, a revolutionary cadre has access to the true, objective meaning of events. That is, his consciousness is the direct self-consciousness of historical necessity itself. It is this special position that allows him to criticize others in the well-known style of your intentions may be good and your desire to help people sincere, but nonetheless, objectively, what you claim means, in this precise moment of the struggle, support for the reactionary forces. In Hegelese, what this position overlooks is how this objective meaning is already subjectively mediated. It is, for example, when the party decides to change its political line, that the same politics can radically change its objective meaning. Up until the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1939, fascism was the principal enemy, while if, after the pact, one continued to focus on the anti-fascist struggle, one objectively served imperialist reaction. And the cadre's sublime body is the ethereal support of this direct self-consciousness of the historical absolute subject. There is nonetheless a crucial rupture here between Lenin and Stalin. While Lenin remained at this level, claiming access to the objective meaning of the events, Stalin took a fateful further step and re-subjectivized the objective meaning. In the Stalinist universe, there are paradoxically ultimately no dupes. Everyone knows the objective meaning of their acts, so that instead of illusory consciousness, we get direct hypocrisy and deceit. The objective meaning of your acts is what you really wanted, and your good intentions are merely a hypocritical mask. Furthermore, all of Lenin cannot be reduced to the subjective position of privileged access to objective meaning. There is another much more open, subjective position at work in Lenin's writings, the position of total exposure to historical contingency. From this position, there is no true party line waiting to be discovered, no objective criteria to determine it. The party makes all possible mistakes, and the true party line emerges out of the zigzag of oscillations. That is, necessity is constituted in praxis. It emerges through the mutual interaction of subjective decisions. Historians who try to demonstrate the continuity between Lenin's politics and Stalinism like to focus on the figure of Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Cheka, later the CPU, NKVD, KGB, the Bolshevik secret police. As a rule, he is portrayed as what Deleuze would have called the dark precursor of Stalinism, in the precise sense of the term as defined by Ian Buchanan. Dark precursors are those moments in a text which must be read in reverse if we are not to mistake effects for causes. In the context of the pre-Stalinist development of the Soviet Union in the first decade after the October Revolution, Dzerzhinsky has to be read in reverse, as a voyager who traveled back in time from the Stalinist future a decade ahead. Such a reading often acquires properly phantasmatic dimensions, as in those historians who emphasize Dzerzhinsky's cold blank gaze allegedly a bodily expression of his ruthless mind, deprived of all human warmth and compassion. No wonder, then, that the West received with chilled surprise the news that the Putin government in Russia decided to return the Dzerzhinsky statue to the square in front of the infamous Lubyanka Palace, the seat of the dreaded KGB. There are, however, some surprises in store for those who cling to this received image. Leslie Chamberlain's The Philosophy Steamer, a book about the expulsion from the Soviet Union in 1921 of the group of most exposed non-Marxist intellectuals, a work which insists precisely on the straight path, if not direct continuity, between Leninism and Stalinism, has an appendix of short biographical notes on all the persons involved. Here is the entry on Dzerzhinsky. Felix Dzerzhinsky, 1877 to 1926, Polish-born head of the Cheka, later the GPU, oversaw the expulsions. Dzerzhinsky spent a quarter of his life, 11 years, in Tsarist prisons and Siberian exile, including 3 years of hard labor. His identification with and championship of the underprivileged and the oppressed, legate, was unquestionable. Dzerzhinsky remains an enigmatic figure. There are many further details which throw an unexpected light on this emblematic figure. However, the point is not primarily to emphasize how much softer, more human, the early Bolsheviks were. One should in no way cover up the harshness of their rule. The point is elsewhere. Precisely when they resorted to terror, and they often did it openly, calling the beast by its name, Red Terror. This terror was different from the Stalinist kind. Of course, many a historian, while ready to concede this point, would nonetheless insist that there was a deeper necessity which led from the first to the second. Is the shift of ruthless revolutionary purity into corrupted terror not a commonplace of the histories of revolutions? No doubt the early Bolsheviks would have been shocked at what the Soviet Union turned into in the 1930s, as many of them were, and were also ruthlessly exterminated in the Great Purges. However, their tragedy was that they were not able to perceive in the Stalinist terror the ultimate offspring of their own acts. What they needed was their own version of the old Oriental insight, Tatvam Asi, thou art that. This accepted wisdom, which, let me state clearly, cannot be dismissed as cheap anti-communism. It has its own coherent logic, and it does acknowledge a tragic grandeur in the Bolshevik old guard, is what one should nonetheless render problematic. Here the left would propose its own alternative to the now fashionable rightist WhatIf histories. The answer to the eternal leftist query, what would have happened if Lenin had survived 10 years longer with his health intact and succeeded in disposing Stalin, is not as clear as it might appear. The liberal would answer basically nothing, that is to say, nothing really different, the same Stalinism, just deprived of its worst excesses. In spite of many good arguments on its behalf, did Rosa Luxemburg herself, not already back in 1918, foretell the rise of bureaucratic Stalinism? So, although it is clear how Stalinism emerged from the initial conditions of the October Revolution and its immediate aftermath, one should not a priori discount the possibility that, had Lenin stayed healthy for a couple of years and removed Stalin, something entirely different would have emerged. Not, of course, the utopia of democratic socialism, but nonetheless something substantially different from Stalinist socialism in one country, the result of a much more pragmatic and improvised series of political and economic decisions, fully aware of its own limitations. Lenin's desperate last struggle against reawakened Russian nationalism, his support for Georgian nationalists, his vision of a much more decentralized federation, and so forth, were not just tactical compromises, they implied a vision of state and society totally incompatible with the Stalinist perspective. Therein resides the importance of Trotsky. Although Trotskyism often functions as a kind of politico-theoretical obstacle, preventing the radical self-critical analysis needed by the contemporary left, the figure of Trotsky nonetheless remains crucial inasmuch as it stands for an element which disturbs the alternative, either social democratic socialism or Stalinist totalitarianism. What we find in Trotsky, in his writings and his revolutionary practice in the early years of the Soviet Union, is revolutionary terror, party rule, and so forth, but in a different mode from that of Stalinism. One should thus, in order to remain faithful to Trotsky's real achievements, dispel the popular myths of a warm democratic Trotsky who favoured psychoanalysis, mixed with surrealist artists, and had an affair with Frida Kahlo. And again, the conclusion, even if Trotsky had won, the ultimate result would have been basically the same, or even more, the claim that Trotsky is at the origin of Stalinism, namely that from the late 1920s onwards, Stalinism merely applied and developed measures first envisaged by Trotsky in the early years of war communism, is wrong. History is open. One cannot tell what would have happened if Trotsky had won. The problem lies elsewhere, in the fact that Trotsky's attitude made it impossible for his orientation to win in the struggle for state power. The shift from the Leninism of the 1920s to the Stalinism proper of the 1930s is discernible even at the level of humour in the inner-party debates. A certain kind of humour was always part of Bolshevik debates. Lenin himself said at the 11th Party Congress in 1922 that a joke is a very good thing. We cannot make speeches without cracking a joke here and there. This humour was sometimes rough, sarcastic, laced with glacial irony, but still part of a dialogue of party comrades. To quote Hamlet on the way to his mother in Act 3 of the play, "I will speak daggers to her, but use none." Furthermore, humour and sarcasm in polemical exchanges were strictly symmetrical. Say, during the debate between the Leninist majority and the workers' opposition in 1921, both sides not only resorted to sarcastic and ironic remarks, but also replied in the same way to their opponents' remarks, by turning them around, extrapolating them to the point of ridicule, and so on. In the 1930s, however, a much more cruel form of sarcasm predominated, which the Soviet press itself called victor's laughter, making fun of and laughing at the ridiculous excuses of the impotent and humiliated victims who tried to convince others of their honesty. Examples abound. Dzerzhinsky, the public prosecutor, shouted at Kamenev and Zinoviev during the famous show trial, "Drop this clownish farce." When Smirnov, a defendant of the same trial, denied that he was a terrorist, he was told, "The pathetic attempt to wriggle free is quite comical." Along the same lines, the Kafkaesque quality of the eerie laughter that erupted amongst the public during Bukharin's last speech in front of the Central Committee on February the 23rd, 1937, hinges on the radical discord between the speaker's utter seriousness. He is talking about his possible suicide, and why he would not commit it since it could hurt the party, but would rather go on with the hunger strike till his death, and the reaction of the Central Committee members. Bukharin: "I won't shoot myself, because then people will say that I killed myself so as to harm the party. But if I die, as it were, from an illness, then what will you lose by it?" Laughter. Voices: "Blackmailer!" Voroshilov: "You scoundrel! Keep your trap shut! How vile! How dare you speak like that?" Bukharin: "But you must understand, it's very hard for me to go on living." Stalin: "And it's easy for us." Voroshilov: "Did you hear that? I won't shoot myself, but I will die." Bukharin: "It's easy for you to talk about me. What will you lose after all? Look, if I'm a saboteur, a son of a bitch, then why spare me? I make no claims to anything. I am just describing what's on my mind, what I am going through. If this in any way entails any political damage, however minute, then no question about it. I'll do whatever you say." Laughter. Why are you laughing? There is absolutely nothing funny about any of this. The same uncanny laughter also appeared in other places. Bukharin: "Whatever they are testifying against me is not true. Laughter, noise in the room. Why are you laughing? There is nothing funny in all this." Do we not have here, enacted in real life, the uncanny logic of Joseph K.'s first interrogation in the trial? "Well then," said the examining magistrate, turning over the leaves and addressing K. with an air of authority, "you are a house painter." "No," said K. "I am the junior manager of a large bank." This answer evoked such a hearty outburst of laughter from the right party that K had to laugh too. People doubled up with their hands on their knees and shook as if in spasms of coughing. In such a universe, of course, there is no place for even the most formal and empty right of subjectivity, on which Bukharin continues to insist. Bukharin. I confess that from 1930 to 1932 I committed many political sins. I have come to understand this. But with the same forcefulness with which I confess my real guilt, with that same forcefulness I deny the guilt which is thrust upon me, and I shall deny it forever. And not because it has only personal significance, but because I believe that no one should under any circumstances take upon himself anything superfluous, especially when the party doesn't need it, when the country doesn't need it, when I don't need it. Noise in the room, laughter. The whole tragedy of my situation lies in this, that this Piatakov and others like him so poison the atmosphere, such an atmosphere arose that no one believes human feelings. Not emotions, not the impulses of the heart, not tears, laughter. Many manifestations of human feeling, which had earlier represented a form of proof, and there was nothing shameful in this, have today lost their validity and force. Kaganovich. You practice too much duplicity. Bukharin. Comrades, let me say the following concerning what happened. Klopliankin. It's time to throw you in prison. Bukharin. What? Klopliankin. You should have been thrown in prison a long time ago. Bukharin. Well, go on, throw me in prison. So you think the fact that you were yelling, throw him in prison, will make me talk differently? No, it won't. It is easy to see how this shift in humour depends on the passage from the Leninist notion of the objective meaning of one's acts to its Stalinist re-subjectivization. Since, in the Stalinist universe, there are ultimately no dupes, and everyone knows the objective meaning of their acts, disagreement with the official party line can only be the result of direct hypocrisy and deceit. What is more surprising is the readiness of Western communist observers to perceive this hypocrisy as a true psychological fact about the accused. In a letter to Benjamin from 1938, Adorno reports a conversation he had with Hans Eisler in New York. I listened with not a little patience to his feeble defense of the Moscow trials, and with considerable disgust to the joke he cracked about the murder of Bukharin. He claims to have known the latter in Moscow, telling me that Bukharin's conscience was already so bad that he could not even look him, Eisler, honestly in the eyes. Eisler's psychological blindness is staggering here. He misreads Bukharin's terror, fearing contact with foreigners, knowing that he is under observation and close to arrest, as an inner feeling of guilt.